Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Rising Importance of Sustainability and Its Impact on Talent Teams. We're going to give just a few moments for more people to join before we kick things off, but thank you all for joining promptly. All right, let's kick things off. So we are so thrilled to have a wonderful panel gathered for you all today. As we've seen, the demand for sustainability in business is driven by broad awareness of the danger of climate change, but also corporate decision makers are beginning to recognize the business benefits sustainability practices can provide. And these panelists are more than well equipped to speak on everything that's happening and has happened in their experience. So I'll pass things over to our host, Dave Callaway, who will kick things off.
Thank you, Andrea, and welcome everybody to the rising importance of sustainability and its impact on talent teams. Brought to you by Boardex, a unit of Altrata. I'm David Callaway. I'm founder and editor-in-chief of Callaway Climate Insights, a leading financial newsletter dedicated to ESG and climate investing and executives and climate industry. I'm a former editor of USA Today and MarketWatch, who decided about 3 years ago that the media wasn't doing enough to add scrutiny and focus and rigor to the subject of adapting to climate change, particularly through solutions and through investors and through its impact on corporate teams and boards. Along the way, I was CEO of a company called Street here in New York City, which for many years was the owner of Boardex, and I'm very familiar with its data and its excellent team, and very happy to be part of this webinar for you. You can read all about it tomorrow on Callaway Climate Insights at callawayinsights.com, or you can access the recording, as Andrea said, which should be ready for you within an hour or so after the webinar is over. But for those of you who are here with us this morning, welcome. We've got a great show for you and look forward to answering some of the more difficult questions surrounding what the rise of sustainability is, what it means for management teams and boards, and particularly for hiring top talent. I'm going to let our great panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get right to the questions. Jennifer, let's start with you.
Good morning. Great to be here. My name is Jennifer Skilakos, and I am a managing partner and global head of the Sustainable Infrastructure and Energy Funds Practice Group at DHR. DHR is an executive search and advisory firm with 50 offices globally. I'm based in New York. My practice group includes professionals in Chicago, London, Munich, Sao Paulo, and Singapore. I'm a recovering lawyer and fell into recruiting and consulting about 12 years ago, with all of those 12 years being within the infrastructure and energy space. So our practice group focuses mainly on 3 areas: recruitment of investment, fundraising, and asset management professionals for infrastructure and energy private equity funds, with a focus on team builds and build outs. We then work with those funds portfolio companies, helping them develop C-suites and boards, and we provide organizational review design and implementation services to help organizations achieve their business goals. We also make strategic introductions for funds or management teams seeking GP sponsorship. Additionally, I lead the ESG practice at DHR, and so our team also works with public companies across industry to hire leaders and develop ESG capabilities to help them meet their specific goals.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Paula.
Thanks, and thanks for having me this morning. I'm Paula Luff. I'm head of ESG research and engagement at DSC Meridian Capital. We are event-driven corporate credit investors. We integrate ESG across our investment process, and almost 2 years ago, we launched our Climate Action Fund. We focus on high yield issuers, and while that is a small slice of the investable universe in the US, it has an outsized climate impact. And so in addition to investing in climate solutions, you have to invest in hard to decarbonize companies and kind of push them on the road to Paris alignment. I've been in asset management for about 5 years in this type of role. And prior to that, I was what is now known as a chief sustainability officer, pushing for change internally inside corporations. And so I like to think because our strategy here at DSC is very collaborative, engagement oriented, that experience both serves the firm well, but also our portfolio company as well. We provide pretty extensive technical assistance to them as they think about their ESG journeys.
All right, and Heidi.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Really excited to have this discussion. I head up ESG for AEA Investors. We are a middle market private asset manager covering both private equity and debt strategies. In terms of my career trajectory, which I thought might be useful given the conversation today, I started my career as a public and private M&A deal lawyer, then bolted on corporate governance and board advisory work, spent 10 years in 3 different publicly traded companies here in the US, and transitioned some time ago into ESG full-time at PepsiCo, where I headed up all the internal aspects of sustainability. That led to building out a strategic advisory practice at Edelman, the PR and communications firm. And now I'm back in private equity from a very different perspective. I think you'll hear a lot about having a 360 view on this panel, and that is my role today. I really work at the portfolio company level, at the fund level, with limited partners, and internally at our firm, as well as on external engagement matters. So yeah, 360 is going to be a theme, I think. But I'll hand it back to you, David. You're our leader.
Okay, thanks, Heidi. And your legal background is interesting. It brings me to my first question for the panel. When I was looking at the role of CSOs a few years ago after I started my business, I contacted BoardX and had them run some numbers for me about the number of CSOs at Fortune 500 companies, and there was something like only 37 or 38 back in 2020. That has grown dramatically over the last few years. Indeed, half of the CFO positions have been hired in 2021 and 2022. But a deeper look at the BoardX numbers shows some interesting trends, which I'd like you all to comment on. 80% of those CSO positions in the Fortune 500 are people in their 50s and 60s. Relatively little new blood is coming in. 79% of them were hired internally. In other words, brought over from another department. Only 1/4 of them have sustainable backgrounds, and about 2/3 of the ones that are hired from externally are sustainable. So those numbers suggest to me that, obviously that the industry is new, which we all know, and that's why we're here to talk about its challenges growing up. But it shows that a lot of companies are still kind of just moving deck chairs around instead of maybe looking for real quality talent. And that seems to be a major conundrum that all of you can really change. Jennifer, let me start with you, because you were one that pointed this out. You had a particularly interesting word for what companies do when they're looking for a chief sustainable officer. What was that?
Being voluntold. Where and this happens at the fund, on the fund side and at the company side, where they will ask somebody to spearhead it, but not really ask, and it becomes a bit of a nights and weekends job in some situations, which again do anybody any favors. And it also doesn't really provide any, like, you know, if they pull Joe out of risk management and ask him to give it the old college try, unless something's actually tied to it, it's going to be the last thing on his list.
And Paula, how does that hurt a company when it does it? It seems that it's really sets it back in a way, at least, you know, a couple of years in what it's trying to do.
Well, I think we take a broader view of the role. I agree. I think just pulling someone in who may be 5 years from retirement needs something to do is probably not the great way to go. But you know, when you think about the role, you know, it has evolved over the past 15 to 20 years. And when I got into this space, it's largely focused on philanthropy, right? And then, you know, over time, so companies tended to bring in people from the outside with nonprofit experience, or stakeholder experience, or government relations experience. As the role has evolved and become a little bit more focused on how companies operate as opposed to how they communicate, there is huge value in, you know, tasking someone who knows the business and knows the culture of the organization to kind of spearhead the effort. If you're trying to pivot how a company does business and how it operates, you need someone with that kind of influence internally. And you know, they can build the capability and the understanding, or they can hire someone who has the sustainability kind of street cred and experience to support. So, you know, I think it's important to select the right person for the job based on where the company is, whether that's internal or external. I was frankly surprised to hear how many incumbent CSOs are male and skew older. That was an eye opener for me. Look, I think, you know, as this role becomes less new, as there's more talent coming on stream, I think companies need to be much more creative and inclusive and out of the box in terms of their thinking as to how they recruit the right talent for these roles, whether that's internal or external, and what attributes they're looking for in those candidates, including diversity.
Yeah, I was stunned by those numbers too. But Heidi, you made a good point before when we were talking earlier that and you touched on it, Paula, that the job description of these positions is often very operational and should be operational. And indeed, you said, you know, Heidi came from legal and operations, and you have a background doing this at PepsiCo, one of the largest international companies. Can you tell how, you know, the structure of the job has changed over the last couple of years, and that might help inform kind of why we're seeing this particular trend?
Sure. So there is the operational excellence component of ESG. It's how you're running your company. I think that there is now greater understanding that fundamentally this is a strategy job. You have to be able to understand business, what the objectives of the business are for the next 3 to 5 years, and meld your ESG priorities with the business priorities so that you can effectively contribute to the execution of the company's business strategy and understand the ESG derailers that could negatively impact performance as you move towards a successful strategy implementation. I personally at PepsiCo sat in the corporate strategy group, and from there would partner with numerous different regions, global functions to develop our objectives and then parse out who is responsible for execution of those objectives. A great example is, you know, if you want to reduce sugar by X% in a beverage, there are multiple contributors to that. Our R&D has a role in formulation. Marketing has a role in promoting that product. Ops has a role in actually making the product. So you're already starting to see a multiplicity of expertise that it's the job of the CSO to pull together correctly so that objective can be reached. It's just like any other business objective.
I think that's a good point, and you can't just have a CSO and top management shouting into the wind to be sustainable, you need to have every level of the company down to product, and it's especially companies the size of PepsiCo. So that would, that would mean that we are close to seeing a much broader adoption of CSO roles and jobs and positions coming in the near future, bull markets willing. Jennifer, where are you seeing kind of new CSO or at least new sustainability talent coming from right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see, well, it depends how creative the client is, right? And I think one of the things we start with, I think sort of a step back, is asking clients where they are in their journey, because that's going to then determine the types of folks. And maybe it is, I think, to Paula, your point, or maybe Heidi, you mentioned this, like bringing somebody who can influence stakeholders within the organization. You build a team around that person, and then figuring out, okay, what does our journey look like? Where are we trying to get to? It doesn't have to be you don't have to be bold right out of the gate, but you have to execute on whatever you're promising, whether it's to investors or shareholders. And then let's figure out those components and find folks to help get to that goal. So they could come from a variety of backgrounds, right? They could come from communications, they could come from strategy, marketing, even sort of climate sustainability type roles. What you want to make sure of is you have folks who do have a strategic mindset, who understand all of the components of the business, can help, even if they know one stream of it, that they can work with the other stakeholders in the operation. But it's not, I think the thing is, it's not a quick fix. It's not like, go get me a CSO and all of our problems will be solved. We'll throw them on an earnings call and everything will be fine, right? I think it's really about taking a step back and understanding that particular company, what they want to achieve, and then the people on the team can come from a variety of backgrounds, but you have to be creative, I think.
Are the business schools helping at all?
I think the issue sometimes with the business schools, and Paul and Heidi, you might have a different view on this, is that it depends on the program. If you're churning out academics on the subject, that's great, but we're not writing white papers in these companies, right? We really need to effectuate change. So there's a role for those folks, of course, but it really isn't the go-to spot or go-to place for candidates for us.
Paula?
Yeah, so just picking up on that, I think the business schools, there are some business schools that are definitely beginning to really integrate sustainability into core curricula, as they're training the next generation of CFOs or chief strategy officers, et cetera, making sure that they're kind of exposed, to that content as core leaders in an organization. I think that's really important. Look, I think in terms of the talent issue, what I'm seeing now, at least because we focus on a range of size of corporations as investors, but definitely smaller and mid-market publicly traded companies are adding talent relatively quickly. The larger companies have had folks on seat for some time. And you're seeing that because that's a reflection of just the general growth in voluntary disclosure. When you look at the GNA Institute's annual trends report, particularly among the bottom half of the Russell 1000, you've seen a huge leap in disclosure over the past several years. That requires people to marshal. One of my concerns, and also the regulatory environment is changing, right? The European Union just came out with a corporate reporting directive that is quite detailed and will apply to 50,000 companies, even if they're not domiciled in the EU. And I think that's driving some talent. Obviously, the SEC is slated to issue some rules, one on greenhouse gas and climate change reporting, the other on human capital. That's a revision of a 2020 rule. I think that will drive the demand for talent, especially in publicly traded companies that don't have talent on seat. My main concern, though, is that all of this is being driven by disclosure. And disclosure is not the end game here. Sure, we want companies to disclose, but that disclosure should be a tool for strategy. To Heidi's earlier point, it is not the goal of the exercise. The goal of the exercise is operational excellence. It's resilience. It's being a relevant and viable company in 5 and 10 and 20 years. It's not the thud value of a beautiful brochure that comes out every July.
That's a really good point, and one ESG head I know on Wall Street said, you know, if after I'm done with my job 5 or 10 years from now, they say your company disclosed better than anybody, I'm nothing, right?
Don't put that on my
So
tombstone, please.
exactly, the effort is decarb, right? And at least manage the risk. And so I want to bring that one to you, Heidi,
Yeah.
because, you know, what is the role? I mean, I guess it would depend on the company and the industry, but there's risk management, and then there's actual, you know, decarbonization, your scope 1, 2, and 3 efforts. That would fall under this role as well. How do you divide that into that in a big company? What do you look for in the companies you guys are investing in?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add to what people just described, risk management, decarbonization, and operational excellence, is innovation and development of adjacent business lines using existing core competencies. If we make progress toward net zero and governments pursue it successfully, the economy will change, which means businesses have different business models. So if you think of a supplier to an oil and gas company that has made a major investment in renewables, that supplier may produce valves. They know valves, they know flow control, so they can create a new valve in the new economy, right? So I think that's why corporate strategy and forward looking is so important. In terms of how you do it, with what I just talked about, you've got to get the guy or the woman or whoever it is who's in control of the P&L for that product on board, to, you know, invest in the R&D, do the CapEx, and produce that product. So it's really, you know, again, what's the objective and who has the expertise to do that? If it's a water reduction goal, operations, and perhaps R&D if you have water experts in your R&D team. If it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, maybe the diversity, equity, and inclusion officer or the head of HR does the program design, but it's management that has to implement the requirement for a diverse slate of candidates, for example. So I think once you know what it is you want to do, the how of mapping the capabilities to the what is fundamental, or else nothing's going to happen. You're not gonna get anywhere.
Right. It's a good point. And yeah, I know at least in the markets that I cover, the Fed and the FCC, and you know, the Europeans very focused on disclosure and climate risk, climate intelligence, but really the operations that are going to get us the progress that we need. Before I leave this theme of the hiring, I want to look at compensation. There's a lot of talent in the pipeline, a lot of roles you've all described that are needed to be hired in the coming few years. Not a lot of up and coming expertise. What is that doing to hiring premiums, Jennifer?
Compensation's just higher than any company is expecting, frankly. You know, they position it as sometimes even sort of a mid-level job from compensation perspective, and get a bit of a shock when they see the talent out there and what it's going to cost them. But again, that kind of goes back to, you know, why are you doing this? What type of investment do you want to put into your organization? Because if what you're going to get out of this is, you know, extraordinary, and to meet your goals, then, you know, you get the right person at the price point you have to get them at. And then I think what it also does is it puts them, you know, talent's asking a lot more questions, right? It's why do you want me, right? What do you see me doing? What do you think I can bring to the table? And they're asking to make sure that all of the influencers of the organization, all the stakeholders are on board. And they also are asking about the CSO title. You'll see a lot of VPs of sustainability out there, or SVPs, and these types of roles. And it's not about ego. What they want to know is there a path to it? Because if the answer is no, then they're questioning the intention, which we always ask, what is the intentionality of the organization to make this a priority, right? And so they get their answers as a candidate from asking these questions, and we do as well. But if you want the right talent, again, it depends on how committed you are to it. You can put somebody in at a reasonable price point at a VP or SVP level, and maybe a little greenwashing there, but if that's what you want to do, you can do that. If you want the right people, you're going to pay more than you thought.
Right. Yeah. How much of that is greenwashing, do you think? We've talked about, if I'm a CEO and I want to appoint a big CSO, I look to an agency, a consultant, and I see that it's going to cost me a lot, so I move Bob over from legal or something like that. Is that just a form of greenwashing in some sense? I guess greenwashing is a loaded word, but what was it? Box ticking?
It's box ticking. Oh, I had a call, the BlackRock folks came in, they told me I needed to have this role. I'll move Bob over because, we can't devote the resources right now. We'll check that box. And next time we talk to that PM, we'll say, yeah, absolutely, we have a CSO on seat. I don't think it's totally greenwashing.
Okay. All right. Let's switch over to another theme impacting demand for these types of positions, and that is the political backlash we've seen against ESG in the US in particular. Lots of opinions on whether it's warranted or whether it'll have any effect. But to me, it seems from looking out from the inside that it has had at least some impact in slowing down what the big players, Blackstone, Vanguard, you've seen the stories about some of them kind of putting the brakes on some of their activities. I don't get the sense that that has really impacted a company's internal efforts, if maybe it has its external. Heidi, why don't you take a crack at that first? Has there been a major impact from the headlines out of Washington on what your team or your teams you invest in?
The momentum in the market? No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm a capitalist. I like business, follow the money. Larry Fink just announced at Davos that inflows vastly exceeded outflows from this perspective. If that's where the money is going, that's where business will ultimately go as well, I think. You obviously, from a legal and regulatory perspective, need to analyze what these laws and how they are implemented, for example, by state treasurers, will mean for what you can, safely, from a litigation perspective, offer to current and potential clients. So you have to tread wisely, right? But I think big picture, money is continuing to move in this direction.
That's Paula?
Yeah, I agree. Look, and society is continuing to move in this direction. If you want to hire Gen Z and younger millennial talent as a corporation and don't have an authentic kind of sense of purpose and understanding of the ESG issues that matter to your business, and you're not acting on them, you're going to lose in the war for talent. And I personally have yet to read a 10K where talent isn't one of the top 5 risks cited by a corporation. So I think that's first and foremost. In terms of investors, I agree, the capital flows are still flowing to ESG. The challenge is, I think multifold. One, we politicize everything in this country. We can't even agree on the color of the sky. That's part of what's at play here. But I think there are deeper issues at play. One, there's no set of standards or even a standard definition of ESG or sustainability. It sort of suffers from a Rashomon effect. If you ask 10 people what sustainability means, either in the corporate or investment context, you're going to get 30 different answers. So I think we suffer from a lack of standards. There's a lot of product out there, at least on the investment side, and a lot of efforts on the part of corporations that are greenwashing, and they're not sincere, and they're not thoughtful or authentic. That's problematic. Those will get weeded out over time. But that's, I think, a function of the newness of the field and how quickly it is moving. And I think, frankly, as a society, we've not done well with major transformations that disrupt people's lives, right? It's all easy to say, to throw paint at masterpieces in museums and say no more fossil fuels, but that has real implications for the Treasury in Texas, which relies on fossil fuel, as a major driver of tax revenue, both corporate and personal. It impacts coal miners and others who need to be upskilled and reskilled. We don't do a great job of that as a society. What's going to happen to those workers? What happens to the grocery store workers in those communities that are now going to be hollowed out? And so, I think it's very easy to kind of talk in slogans and absolute terms, but the real work that has to be done is we are on the cusp of a huge transformation. There is no question that decarbonization is moving full steam ahead, and there will be winners and losers. And we're going to see a very different economy. The question is, as a society, are we actually going to cushion the blow for those who are going to be left behind?
Okay, so the transformation and the investment continues. I'm hearing that also. But Jennifer, is the term ESG has it become loaded? Is it outdated? Might we move back to PRI or whatever it was 20 years ago? Or does it just become too much of a political football? And I'm not asking really so much for you to read the tea leaves as, are you seeing companies changing the name at all to sustainability or something a little less hot?
We're not really seeing that as being a driver. Like, should we change this so it's softer, or I mean, people actually, they want externally people to know that they're working on these things, and frankly, those are the phrases people know right now. I think what we're seeing, I was talking to somebody, a large asset manager, and he said, I feel like they've put sustainable in all of our titles. Like, it's suddenly everybody has it, everybody within the organization. He's like, this is all very strange. And so who really is an expert, who really is the go-to person is becoming muddied. So I would say it's not that they're changing the name of it. I think they're using it too liberally around some companies and financial institutions so that they look as if everybody's taking part in this. But if you drill down, the person doesn't even know why it's in their title. So I think that is from a sort of what we call it perspective. That's what we're seeing more than someone saying, ESG seems a little loaded for our investors. We should figure out what else to call it. We're not personally seeing that.
Okay, great. Well, look, that brings me to the next theme I want to talk about, which is corporate structure, right? And how sustainability works in the companies. I told you all in the newsrooms that I used to run about 15 years ago when social media became big, and no journalist in the newsroom had any experience in social media. Our solution was we would hire someone out of college who knew how to tweet and knew how to find their way around Instagram, Facebook, and then tell them to tweet out our stories. And so then we were social. And if there's any questions about what was happening on the internet, Mary would get the question. It seems to me at some point, that some companies at least, like if we tick that box, we've got our sustainability officer, anything sustainable goes to them. But what Jennifer was just saying is suddenly the titles are filtering down. And as we realized in the newsrooms, every journalist has to be social in some format and needs to be involved in the digital transformation of news. Just as now we're seeing every role, every product, every portfolio, every level needs to have some sort of sustainable talent, but emphasis. Heidi, how important is this kind of structure? You touched on it earlier, but
Yeah.
What is that going to mean 5 years out from now in big companies?
Sure. So I think today, in a large company, you have to be very clear about what the sustainability leader owns and is accountable for, and then how they partner with the rest of the organization. So my top 4 for ownership are the strategy development and then the execution planning. That map of if we want to get to this point on diversity by 2025, this is the work back plan. Governance management is part 3. So anything that needs to go to the board of directors, the meetings of an ESG council, for example, would be managed out of that office or that individual. And then part 3 is goes to the output when you a report. I agree with Paula, is literally a report on your performance, and so the data collection and the measurement and reporting and transparency would be owned by the office. And then, as we've discussed a little bit earlier, the actual, while execution planning might be owned by the office, the actual execution is parsed out the way we've already described. Engagement internally and externally is also a partnership deal. So with a publicly traded company or with us, with our limited partners, I'll be partnering with investor relations. With an ESG report, you're probably partnering with your communications team. So you're providing the substantive expertise. They're applying, for example, their social media expertise. And part 3, reporting and compliance, you're partnering with audit and legal to make sure that your data is high quality, because if it's not, your performance reporting isn't really credible. 5 years from now, I think there'll be further integration into other roles. So for example, at AEA, I'm really an advisor to the investment teams and keeping them up to speed on ESG developments and what to be looking out for. From the very start of an investment process, we have a diligence checklist. We do in-depth confirmatory due diligence. Within 100 days, our companies appoint a leader, and we follow the trajectory and the performance through to exit. But our investment teams can't invest well if they don't know this field to some degree, with me helping them out.
So would you, the question for all of you is in terms of investing or M&A, things like that, is sustainability suddenly become a major priority in the due diligence you're looking at?
Yeah, I would say that, look, we talk about ESG investing, and what we're really talking about is not an investment strategy, it's a tool, right? We are active investors. We are paid to understand these companies in depth and to understand what is priced in and what is not. What has the market missed? Where are the information asymmetries? And I think that's where ESG is such a value add. In our firm, it's led by the analysts, much like Heidi's. I'm the coach. And this is all about, really thoroughly underwriting a company as part of our fundamental sort of bottom-up approach, understanding what's priced in, sizing the position appropriately, and understanding the risk we're taking. And that is, it makes us better investors. And so that's where I see the real value here. Sadly, everyone sort of sees, a lot of people still see this, just like in companies, they see this as a separate kind of thing, sustainability over here. It's part of how you operate. It's not some separate entity over here. Same thing in investing. It should be part of your process, part of your diligence, part of your engagement with companies. Because it matters to the price of the security, it matters to valuation, it matters to the stakeholders, not because it's some nice thing to do and there's a checklist and an investor asked me to do it, so I'm going to say I'm doing ESG investing.
Jennifer,
Yeah, I think of a really concrete example. We worked a lot with the agro team at PepsiCo because agro is obviously fundamental to the company's products. But say we're looking at some kind of agro investment. And you got to look at the customers. Like if you're looking at, I don't know, a nutrient company or a tractor company, for example, if 50% of their customers are in areas that are at high risk of drought, what does that do to your revenue stream?
Right.
So Jennifer, are you seeing that in your clients when they're looking at M&A deals?
So I'm in a bit of a unique position because my clients have sort of embedded this in their investment process for years, just by nature of their investments. But I think it is, they're being asked to showcase it in a different way now, as it's become more important to talk about it outwardly, whether it's with LPs or just as they are evaluating acquisitions. Right, it's just becoming a sort of more vocal piece, but it's always sort of fundamentally been a part of their thesis.
Okay. All right. Interesting. And that's the energy and infrastructure. So you would expect that. That's where it's going to happen the most.
Energy, as in transitional energy, renewable,
Right.
etc.
Exactly.
We're not drilling, but even that supply chain, right? And those services that are, I think to Heidi's point, right, have to create a new valve. It's our investors are looking at investments through that lens, no matter what part of the chain it's in.
Interesting. And we're starting to see a movement of more oil and gas companies, traditional companies, buying into renewables. So I would see
They see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
We're hitting peak oil according to the IEA. So
yeah. Well, we're getting to the point where I'm going to, in a couple minutes, I'm going to open this up to questions from the audience. So please, if you have any questions for Heidi or Paula or Jennifer, send them in now, and we'll get them out. We'll also be available afterwards if you want to email us. I'm sure we'll let you get in contact, and we'd be happy to respond. But one more theme I want to hit on beforehand is the role of corporate boards in all of this. And Heidi, you mentioned, well, you all mentioned that for someone with a lot of CSO background and talent that's being, invited to join a company, they want to know where their job is going to be in the company. They also want to know what the board commitment is. And so are we seeing, is this mostly at the management level? Are we seeing a similar adaptation by boards in terms of adapting subcommittees and putting those subcommittees at an important levels and stuff? Who would like to tackle that one first?
I can talk to the public company side,
sure.
If that's helpful. So what we're seeing is a combination of all of the above. We're seeing much more board involvement as that expectation is rising among regulators, but also among the public as sustainability becomes a more and more important topic in the boardroom. We're seeing separate committees. We're seeing rejiggering of corporate charters of existing committees, whether it's nominating and governance or audit. Again, that's going to depend on the industry, but we're definitely seeing much more board involvement and oversight. And increasingly seeing a subcommittee of senior management that kind of handles the day-to-day. And that is often the interface for the chief sustainability officer and their work. But in our investment process, we are very focused on board oversight because we believe that if a sustainability topic that a company is focusing resources on is material to its business today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and they make a major commitment, say, to pivot their business to decarbonize, then that requires board oversight of the risks and opportunities. It requires alignment of executive compensation. And so we engage pretty robustly with management teams and with boards on that oversight and incentive alignment, those aspects of governance that we think are important.
Should a CSO be a board level seat, Jennifer?
I think in some organizations it may make sense, but I also think that is it a standalone seat? I don't know if that's necessary. I think to Paula's point, having subcommittees that are going to drive and push the management side and the talent they have there, because it is an operational position, to Heidi's point. I think sometimes it could be a bit of window dressing, whereas it's not as important to have that title of somebody on the board. I mean, look, clients call us and say we need a CSO expert, we need a sustainability expert on our board, but it's like, but well, what's happening on the management side? Let's talk about that first before we think about putting somebody with that title on the board, because they're also, any candidates for that board seat is going to ask the same question. Right. What are you doing on the management side? So I don't know if it's always a necessity. Again, it's really about how that's working with the management team.
Heidi, how do you think it should look?
Yeah, we typically own the company, and so we're on the board, and because of my role, our boards know to pursue this, and our companies are required to report at least annually to the board on these matters. I would say substance over form. Whatever works at the oversight level. Management needs to develop the strategy, the board needs to review and approve it and constructively, you know, inquire as to what might be missing, where the stopgaps, where does management think they have pole position, what roadblocks are they anticipating. So it's really the substance of the conversation with management. I don't think the board role of oversight changes. I think Paula mentioned this in one of our previous conversations before this webinar, but you know, the kind of person that you might put on your board is someone maybe who understands international finance really well, from a World Bank perspective or a global climate organization. But Paula, maybe you want to say a few words about that, because I remember it was you who brought that up.
Yeah, we're seeing more upskilling of current directors and adding of sustainability expertise in our portfolio companies. One of our companies did add a global climate expert who's also run an organization, so understands sort of the, even though it's a nonprofit organization, still understands the imperatives of, you know, financial management, et cetera. But we're firm believers that boards need to include skill sets beyond just the traditional ran a company, was a CFO, et cetera, which is important. But increasingly, when you look at the challenges that boards and companies face around cybersecurity, around talent, around sustainability, you know, they need to be a little bit more creative about how they source the right kind of talent that both has subject matter expertise and some understanding or experience running an enterprise of some kind.
Good points. Jennifer, you want to add anything before we throw to questions?
Yeah, we can go to questions, that's fine.
All right. So we've hit the 3/4 hour mark. Andrea, any questions out there for us?
Hey, yes, we have a number of different questions coming in. And again, please everyone continue to use the GoToWebinar panel to send in additional questions. But let me try to make this a little bit bigger. Hold on one second. Okay, so here we have, hello everyone, thank you for your great insights. Now, what about embedding sustainability to the employee life cycle? What are the main barriers to embedding sustainability to a corporate governance and strategy, to accompany corporate governance and strategy that you see from a people and culture perspective?
Good question.
Yeah, that's really important. And in my strategic advisory days, we actually worked with clients on employee engagement and communication and understanding of strategy. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. You know, classic question on an employee engagement survey is how well, you know, do you understand the company's strategy, 1 to 5? So you can put, you know, pop in a single question. You don't want to overcrowd that survey, but, you know, how do you understand the company's approach to ESG, or what is the most important topic to you in this area? So getting a bead on where employees are. And I think, you know, town halls are also very valuable to, just like a public company may have a quarterly town hall to discuss earnings, and there's an Ask Me Anything period. Do the same thing when your ESG report comes out. So the town hall element is really valuable. I think also giving managers, you know, little talking points or sheets that they can incorporate into their team meetings. Like if there's a particular sustainability goal that's relevant to the accounting department, you have like, okay, ESG and me, how does my role contribute? And, you know, incorporate that into team meetings. So those are just a couple examples of employee engagement techniques that might be useful.
Okay, another question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. All right, next question. Thanks, David, and all great discussion. Christina Wyatt, who led the SEC team developing the climate risk disclosure rules, said that she sees women have been in these roles for years now, and now in the prominence of these roles, these women seize opportunities to get to the C-suite. Do you see that, and how can these women actually get those roles?
You mean CSOs? How can they get to the C-suite?
Yes.
So, you know, in a sliver of companies, the CSO is direct report to the CEO. I think that is a trend we're seeing a little bit more of. But in order to get to the C-suite, you have to have P&L experience. You have to understand how that, what makes strategy tick, what makes the business tick. You have to have, and so if you don't have that, I think it makes the road a little bit harder. Not impossible, but one way to do that might be to make a lateral move so that you run a business unit for a few years and then come back in a more senior C-suite role.
Jennifer, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, I think Paul is right. I think those are sort of the fundamentals to get to that level. So within a larger organization, you might have that capability or that ability to kind of raise your hand and get the experience, or you might have to leave where you're at to get it somewhere else to then make your way, eventually to that point.
All right, next question.
All right, next question. Thanks, everyone. All right, here we go. My reporting and consulting is finding that sustainability is more operational and ESG is more strategic, to Heidi's point, because ESG integrates into every aspect of the company. How can people who have this experience identify and access the companies that do take it seriously and understand the need for the integration and how disclosure leads to action? What gets measured gets attention.
I'll jump in with two ideas and then leave it to my colleagues. One is look at where the CSO lives in the organization. Where are they housed? How senior are they? Are they in HR or communications? The further away they are from strategy, from the CFO, from the core business operations, the less likely it is that ESG or sustainability is actually integrated into the operating rhythm of the organization. So that I think is a good indicator. And then in terms of the company itself, as an investor, I look at a number of data sources. We don't just look at an ESG data provider and say, okay, they got an A, so they're good, they're in. I'm going to look at what a company says about itself, right? And I'm not just looking at their sustainability report. I'm going to look at their 10K, their proxy, their investor decks. I want to understand what management has identified as an ESG priority, and then I'm going to look for evidence that there's follow through, both structurally, but also sort of programmatically, if you will. And if there's not, I'm going to ask them about that. If you're telling me in your 10K that talent is your #1 existential risk, and I can't tell how you're managing that, I'm going to ask you about it. And if your answer is, we've ticked a box, we have someone in HR, we're good, that's not an answer, right? And so I think it's a combination of connecting the dots, both structurally and information-wise, and then speaking with management and asking particular questions.
Yeah, I think another thing to do is investigate the tone and the information that's provided on a company's public channels. So let's start with the website. I can almost guarantee you that no company knows exactly how they're going to achieve net zero. There are technologies that are available and scalable now, and there are technologies that are needed that are not available and scalable now. So if a company is saying, look, this is what we want to achieve and this is how we are going to get there, but they're not saying we don't know for sure or disclosing what they don't have, I think that's a good sign. It's also a good sign when a company says, look, we have this ambition and we didn't get there and we learned, and this is the next step for us. So look for directness and look for frankness in how a company describes its own performance.
I also think, just to piggyback on that, it's exactly the description and the words that they use, right? To me, sustainability is the framework, and then ESG is underneath that, right? To be a sustainable organization, you have to have all of those pillars. But you'll see that companies will sometimes use sustainability and sort of ignore the other parts of ESG. But they're like, we're a sustainable organization. They concentrate on the net zero and they try to not speak so much as to the other pillars that will ultimately make them a sustainable organization. So I think it's really about the investigation and what words are they using, how are they using them, and then what strategies do they have in place, and what parts of that ESG are important to you, right? If that's depending on what you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. I think we might have time for one more. Andrea?
Yeah, I think we'll have one more. Again, if we weren't able to answer your question on this call, keep an eye out for some email correspondence to follow up on that. So leave this one looking towards the future. So given the different definitions on sustainability and ESG and no defined standards, how do you see it in the future? When could we expect to see alignment and more important mandatory measures and standards in all industries? And we'd love to hear from each of you really quickly with the last 5 minutes we have on this call to kind of see where you think we're headed.
Jump on it first.
I'll jump in. Look, what has been voluntary for many years, i.e. sustainability reporting, is quickly becoming mandatory. And we are seeing regulation coming out of the SEC. We're seeing regulation coming out of the UK and Europe that is making it mandatory. Hopefully, the globe will coalesce around sort of standards, metrics, et cetera. That's not the case right now. It's a little cacophonous, but I think over time you'll see some, that there will be sort of an agreement of standards. And I think the International Sustainability Standards Board is definitely leading the charge there, but it's going to be messy for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think so too. One thing I'm hopeful for is that as the field matures, respected industry business advocacy organizations can develop a useful rapport with regulators. So it's really useful if you have that trusted interaction where a regulator can come and say, hey, we know we need to do something about this. We need to also, if we adopt this rule, what would happen in your firm? So that kind of interchange between the idea and the reality on the ground, I think is I'm really hopeful for that communication to grow as this matures. And my reason for wanting that is that what I hope doesn't happen with regulation is that business has to be so focused on compliance and disclosure compliance that resources get siphoned away from new business models, capital allocation questions, long-term direction of the organization. So that's really my hope for the future on the regulatory front.
That's a good point, and we've seen in the past that hasn't happened. So fingers crossed. Jennifer?
I agree with both Heidi and Paula, and I also think that it's definitely the standards are not really standards, and they're sort of all over the place right now. But I think some of the again, going back to intention is really going to come from this next generation that's coming up, right? And kind of them pushing the companies they work for, or just making the choice to walk if their companies aren't doing what they believe is important under the sustainability umbrella. We're seeing that so much more in our younger talent, and they're asking those hard questions up front. And if it doesn't meet their standards, they'll find a place that does, where they're happy to work. So I think that it's more of a grassroots effort from that perspective, but I think it's going to force companies, because they all do have this war on talent right now, no matter the role that they're trying to fill. This is a big part of the questions that the younger generation are asking.
All right, great answers. Well, I want to thank all three of you, Jennifer Skalekos, Paula Luff, Heidi Dubois, for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. You're all at the cutting edge of something that is going to really be dominating and hopefully changing business and the economies going forward. All of you out there who took the time to join us, thank you for your thoughtful questions, and we are available in the hours and days afterwards. If you need or want to follow up, I want to thank Boardex for hosting this important webinar, and particularly Andrea, Amanda, and Madeline for all the hard work they did bringing us all together. Thank you again, folks. I'm David Callaway from Callaway Climate Insights.com. We'll see you out there. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.